I thought about the issue of immigration and all of that a lot because we live in Texas. So this is an issue that we hear about.
Yeah, my question leading was, how did I not know that this was such a theme in the Bible, taking care of immigrants, Jesus himself being a refugee? That was a big question for me.
Hey friends, and welcome to another episode of the Happy Hour with Jamie Ivey podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching our episodes. We love recording videos for you guys. And I want to tell you that we have a 3-part series. This is the very first episode of that 3-part series. And it's all about biblical hospitality. Now, I just went on a trip recently in November with Women of Welcome and World Relief. And you're going to hear from them in another episode. And we took some women to the border. We went to San Diego, California, and then we crossed over into Tijuana. And so I invited some of those ladies who went on the trip with me to come talk about their experiences. So on today's show, I have Becky Kaiser and Jessica Thompson. Both of them joined me on this trip. They've actually both been guests on the Happy Hour before, so we'll put their episodes down here in the notes, and you can find their shows and listen to them in the past. But they both joined me, and I asked them a couple of questions about why they said yes, what they learned, what they experienced, and then what has it been like on the other side of them coming home. And so here's my conversation about biblical hospitality with my friends Becky Kaiser and Jessica Thompson. Okay, friends, my first guest on today's show is my friend Becky Kaiser, and Becky joined me at the border just a couple weeks ago as well. And Becky, you and I have known each other for a lot of years, and I'm so glad you got to come to the border with me. Before we jump into your experience, introduce yourself so everyone knows what you do for a living, where you live, and what you're coming into this with.
Yes. So
not what you're coming into this with, but just like, who are you? You know what I mean?
Yes. I am author, speaker, life coach, small business consultant, all the things. And I am in Texas as well. So just north of Houston in the suburbs called the Woodlands.
Awesome. And you have 3 kids?
3 kids, 3 girls, a 7th, 5th, and 3rd grade, all girls, which always gets like lots of big raised eyebrows.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris and I have been married. We just celebrated 16 years.
Congrats.
Yeah,
Congrats.
Thanks.
Okay, so I invited you to come to the border with me.
Yes,
and I kind of would like to start here when I'm going to ask all of our guests the same questions to give us this kind of overarching view of what it was like for you. When you said yes, first of all, I'd like to know, was it a hesitant yes? Was it a yes, yes, yes? Or was it like, let me think about it?
Why would you ask that question on air, Jamie? That's like a lot of pressure.
I want to give everyone the real deal of what you felt going in.
To me, it was because I had heard and seen the trips before. I was interested. And it was like, well, it's Jamie and it's some awesome people I'd love to get to know too. And I'm really interested in this. And so it all worked. And it was, if we can make it work with children, then it's a yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
The issue did not terrify me. It was more like, how do we make this happen the week before Thanksgiving?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I was thinking about it. And the first time that I went, Bree was on that trip as well. And I remember thinking, well, I've never really thought much about the border, but sure, that sounds great, Yeah. And it was just a lot. That's how I felt going into it, which was great. I do want to ask you, when you thought about your trip and you thought about going down there, I'm sure you thought to yourself, okay, here's some questions I might kind of have. What was one of your main questions that you're bringing with you before that trip?
I thought about the issue of immigration and all of that a lot because we live in Texas. So this is an issue that we hear about. For me, it wasn't necessarily a question I had that I wanted to ask. I think it was, I'm a skeptical person. So I was like, y'all kept saying this is a proximity trip. This isn't a mission trip. This isn't a political trip. And I really did not understand how the issue of immigration could be nonpartisan, how this wasn't a political thing, how this could be a biblical thing, and how did that work and how did that look? Because I only knew it from the political stance. So I think my main curiosity was, how do you get past it being a political only issue?
I love that. Do you feel like when you're there, I mean, just so everyone knows, it's not a mission trip. It definitely is a proximity, but we also did a lot of learning. I mean, we did a lot of listening, a lot of learning from Matt. I'm very interested in what you thought leaving from there.
Mm-hmm.
If you came in going, how does this become something that's not political?
Yeah.
Did you leave feeling like, oh, this doesn't have to be political?
Yes. Yeah. I was shocked by that because the leaders of the trip are I truly wouldn't know where they land politically, which was shocking. But more than that, because to them, it's not a political issue. And I think that's the tension we're all going to hold with this. We've only had this conversation from the presidential election platforms for the majority of us. We've heard it on Fox News or CNN, and that's the combativeness that we are aware of it. We don't know how to just talk about, take the politics out of it. There is this issue. How do we as Christians respond to something that's already there? What do we do? Just like Jesus, when he had the 5,000 on the mountain. Well, we can't solve all the world's problems, but we do have 5,000 people here hungry. What do we do with them today? Do we send them back into the town to get food by themselves, like the disciples suggested? Or is there another option? So I felt like that was kind of what I learned on the trip is you can look at this a different way. It doesn't have to be the way you always saw it.
I love it. It's one thing I love about World Relief and Women of Welcome is very much bipartisan. There's never going to be like, hey, we are this, we are that. They openly say we want to work with both people on sides of the aisle, which if you think about it, you need both sides in order to make anything happen, right? I mean, we see that all the time.
Right. Wouldn't the world be better if we could just live non-bipartisan or live
what if we could all get along, Becky? Okay, so I was going to ask you next, what would be your big takeaway? Was that one of your big takeaways or was there something else? What did you come home with besides a million other questions and thoughts?
Yeah, I think I came home with more questions than answers for sure. My take, it's so hard to identify what are your takeaways when you've been that close to it, because I'm still processing the takeaways. But I think the takeaways was I could be wrong. Like I had a lot of assumptions of what it was because I'd only ever heard certain things from both sides. So I have within my own family very strong opinions on both sides of the political spectrum. So I don't have one leaning or another on that. So for me, it was interesting to see the reality, and we saw all the reality. We went to the wall in Mexico. We went to a shelter where people are actively waiting every day, just waiting for an appointment to seek asylum. We went to the wall on the other side. We met with Border Patrol. We met with a refugee. We went and saw where people are held between the two walls. So to see everything, and then Bree kept saying, like, just the reminding of the mission of us as Christians to love, where Bree just kept saying, for them to do, remembering their humanity, and for them to make the choices they have made, to sacrifice what they have sacrificed, whether, yes, what the choices they have made is an illegal choice, but we can, as Christians, have compassion towards them where they are. And I think for me to hear their stories and see them, and that's the difference of proximity, right? It's easy to have opinions if you're just in your living room listening to a certain news channel every single day. And it's very different to have an opinion when you're sitting across the table from someone who has tried every day for 4 months after walking literally from South America to the Mexico-US border barefoot with their 3 children, trying to seek asylum because they do not feel safe in their home country. So that was a different experience, Jamie. That was very different.
It's like important for us to talk about, because it's I'll tell you, Becky, I just read a book. Let me find it. It's okay. It's over here. It's called The Little Liar. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, it's called The Little Liar by Mitch Albom, and it takes place during the Holocaust with a family from Greece. And one of the main characters, someone says to her like twice, "Tell the world what you saw here." And he also has this part in the book where he talks about how one of the guys came home and he'd been at a concentration camp for all those years, and by the grace of God he lived, and he came back to his village and everyone was just doing their life. And the guy says in there, he says, has everyone just been fishing every day, all day while I've been gone? I'm paraphrasing a little
Yeah.
bit, but I remember reading that, and it had just been a couple days since we had been at the border. And I remember thinking, like, God, will you help me remember?
Yeah.
Because life has gone on. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to football games. We're
Yeah.
making dinner. We're applying to colleges. Like,
Yeah.
all these things in my life are happening. And yet I never want to forget the husband and wife with 2 girls and one on the way that
Yeah.
I talked to
Yeah.
who had endured so much. And so it's hard for me. I don't know if it's hard for you as well.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I mean,
these
I
kind
literally
of
on my
experiences
desk,
are hard.
I printed off a picture and it's sitting next to my computer of the border of both sides, the US and this side, because that tension exists, right? Of the safety, security, what is law and what is truth and what needs to be upheld for protection of all people. And yet there are still people that are hurting and suffering and feel like for their family's best interest, they have to flee and escape something that's not right for them. So in the midst of all that, why we can't figure out the political answers of that. And that's not our job. Like, we're all different people, but what we as Christians can do is there's a great need and there's an opportunity for us to support. And there's so many, that's the great thing about Women of Welcome and World Relief is they have so many ways to help equip and educate us on what we can do to support as Christians who are called to love, not just stand politically about this issue.
Yeah, I think what I feel coming back often is like, I don't want to forget the tension. And you just described that.
Yeah.
Like, how do we as Christians stay in the tension?
Yeah.
And it's okay to feel the tension. On the other side of this trip, have you had any meaningful, impactful conversations or experiences since coming home? I often feel like not only does the world go on, but these are hard conversations to have. I find it hard to even have with Aaron sometimes, my husband, because he didn't see what we saw. He didn't stand and I could tell him all day long. Like, I sit down my kids, I'm like, let me show you all the photos and tell you about it. And, their eyes are glazing over and they're teenagers and they're like, okay, so what's for dinner, Mom?
Right.
It's difficult.
Yes.
How's that been for you on the other side?
That's been tricky. And we went right into Thanksgiving and our family went to New York to see other family. And so it's been a weird transition to come back into. I will say what has been, I've had both discouraging and encouraging. So I would say similar to you of like my closest people I've gotten to share, but it also has been like, I'm not doing it right. I'm not doing it justice because there's something about getting close, right? Like just hearing somebody else talk about it's not enough. Once you know someone who has been there, once you've heard the story with your own 2 ears, it's a very different situation. And so it was so impactful, Jamie, and it was so helpful to hear all of that. But I will say that there has now been, not now, it happened when I was there too and posting stories of, there are people who are like hesitantly saying, okay, I want to hear more. And they feel like shame, almost saying like betrayal, because they feel like they should only think one thing about this, and to open up about it feels wrong. And then I've had to block many, many people on social media just because they had very strong opinions in my DMs after my trip. And I'm fine with disagreeing, but we can be kind in the process too. So that again, I think we need to be okay as Christians to say, maybe we don't know everything. And we can be open to being wrong about some of our opinions and seeing it a different way.
I love that so much. Becky, you couldn't have said it better, that we can be okay with not knowing everything. We can disagree even. Like, I love so many times that I heard Matt say, like, we don't even have to agree on how this all happens. But as followers of Jesus, we should agree on our hospitality towards people. And so I'm so glad you went.
Thanks
and I'm
for
glad you had
inviting
this
me,
experience. And thanks for sharing a little bit with us.
Okay, y'all, my next guest here on the show is another friend that invited me to join myself at the border. My friend Jessica Thompson joined me. Hi, Jessica.
Hey, Jamie.
Okay, before I ask you your thoughts on our trip, tell everybody what you do.
I am a pastor at a church in San Diego called Risen Church. I recently finished my master's in biblical studies, which I love to say I have a master's in BS. I feel really good about it.
It's the best.
Honestly, if that alone, being able to say a master's in BS was worth all the work and all the money.
I love it.
Just doing that and pastoring here and have a couple of kids, adult children that are still at home. And
You're an author. You
Oh,
write great
right.
books.
That I'm an author, and actually we're about to re-release a book, our first book, that kind of set off my authoring career, which was Give Them Grace. And my mom and I have updated and revised that. My mom's Elise Fitzpatrick. We've updated and revised it, and thought, my goodness, we really thought we knew everything then, but now we really know everything.
Now is when we know it all.
Now. And so we're about to re-release that pretty soon. So excited about that. Yes, author. And I travel sometimes and speak at conferences as well.
It. Well, we all traveled to your backyard for this
Yeah.
trip. We stayed in San Diego. You and your mom joined us on this trip. And so I think I want to start. I'm asking, 4 of you guys are coming on the show today, and I'm just asking kind of the same questions. You guys, although some of you are pastors and speakers and authors, I would like to say we're all just very real people living our lives, trying to figure out how does this intersect with our faith.
Right.
So I want to know from you, what made you say yes to the invite when I invited you?
Yeah. Because I just don't know what I don't know, I think is part of it. Like you said, this is my backyard, and I am falling more in love with my city in the last probably since COVID, which kind of stripped me. COVID kind of, which it did for most of us. It centered. I've lived in San Diego my whole life, so let me start by saying that, and I love San Diego, but mainly for the weather. But COVID kind of stripped me from like, oh, maybe it's better somewhere else, because we were just stuck where we were. And, stripped me from thinking like, oh, maybe my ministry, we'll use that word, my vocation is like traveling and speaking. COVID set me at home in a way that I've never experienced up to this point. So when you asked me like, hey, you want to go to your own border? I'm learning more about my city, and not just the beautiful weather part, but like learning sort of the underbelly that every big city has, like the darkness that every big city holds. And I'm learning about that. I've kind of been on a journey with that in the last few years. And so while doing that, while learning about my city, when you offered this, I was like, I've got to do this. I need to know more. I also became on a board. I accepted a board invitation for a local nonprofit here in San Diego called Hope for San Diego. And immigration, refugees is one of the areas that Hope for San Diego really focuses in on and helps. I also said yes. It's a long answer, because one of the women in our church actually works for World Relief. And so she's talking about it a lot. And, I want to know more of what she does as well. So that was also part of the reason. Lots of reasons to say yes, but super grateful for the invitation.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you could come, and being right there in your city. I understand what it's like to think I need to know about what's happening in my city, in my state, like right there. I feel that in Texas a lot as well. So when you were coming in for this trip, I'm sure you had a lot of them, but could you narrow down to what were some of your main questions you had?
Yeah. People are always saying like, oh, is the immigration problem terrible in San Diego? You're right on the border. And I was always like, I don't really see it. I live 30 minutes from my door to the border, and I never really saw it. But then I was like, well, maybe I'm missing something. The news is saying that there's something going on, that it's like people are all running across all the time. Like, you have these pictures. I'm sure we have these pictures in our head that we've seen in the news. And when people would ask me and I'd answer and say, I haven't really seen it, I was wondering what it would look like, right? To see it with my own eyes. What is this actually like here? I knew my experience, and I know I live close to the border, but my main question going in was, what is this really like? And not just from one perspective, which I loved about this trip, but from all these different perspectives, looking at it from all these different ways, trying to get this whole view of what is happening at the San Diego-Tijuana border. So for me, that was the question. What is it really like? Because I know what I see, which is not really much.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what I see on the news, which is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it really like?
I love one of the things I love about these trips with Women of Welcome and World Relief is how they do set us up to hear from different
Yeah.
perspectives. We heard from Border Patrol. We heard
Mhm.
from organizations who are hands-on right where people are being
Mhm.
quote unquote held. I guess we could say that
Yeah.
as they wait for their time to seek asylum. We went across the border and
Mhm.
heard from, a woman having a shelter at her church.
Mhm.
So I do love that so much, is this
Mhm.
whole kind of this picture that's not just one
Yeah.
viewpoint, which I think we can get a lot in the news.
Mhm.
You had questions coming in if I wanted to see this. And I always say that I leave these trips with way more questions than answers. What was your big question leaving?
My main question was, how do I get involved tomorrow? What can I do right now? How did I miss this? You know, those were my main questions. I came home and immediately, like my mom, who also was on the trip with us, just immediately got in touch with some of the people that we met, that we were introduced to.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're in talks now about what we can be doing. Just, if it's just my mom and I going down and making sandwiches at a place near the border to feed people, if it's something more than that, I don't know. We're currently trying to figure out what we can do. Also, and this is just something that we're constantly learning, right? Like, how did I not see the Bible had so much to say on this? I think that's something that I've been learning over the past like 3 or 4 years, again, as I've kind of been on this journey. But yeah, my question leaving was, how did I not know that this was such a theme in the Bible, taking care of immigrants, Jesus himself being a refugee? That was a big question for me.
I always leave these trips, and some of the tension that I feel is we live in a country that has laws.
Mm-hmm.
We need security at our borders.
Yeah,
I think nobody would say that
for
we
sure.
shouldn't.
Yeah.
And yet the tension I feel is, as a follower of Jesus, how do I look more like him
Yeah.
in how I care for people in vulnerable situations?
Yeah.
And sometimes that is in conflict
Mm-hmm.
with what our government says is best. And I don't know, I'm struggling. How do I reconcile
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Like, how do I vote that? Like,
Yeah.
it messes your whole life up.
Oh, it does. It really does. I think it's also hard not to leave feeling overwhelmed or hopeless. Like, this is such a big problem. And it's not just a big problem in one area, it's a big problem across the board. There's like you said, there's so much that goes into this. So how, and my mom and I, actually, we talked about this a lot driving to and from, because we met you guys down there. How do we walk away from this without hopelessness? And I think that was another thing that Women of Welcome tried to help us to see signs of hope and commonality and stuff like that. But I think what we kind of came away with was just like, we can do something right now. I don't need to wait for immigration policy change. I don't need to wait for this to be something easier to do or something more convenient. There are things I can do today, right now, that will impact my neighbors, that impact these people that are image bearers, that are sleeping outside at night, that are trying to make a better lives for themselves. And so, even right now, Jamie, I don't know if you've seen in the news, but there are 1,000 people stuck at a border patrol crossing here in San Diego, in Jacamba, which is a little bit east from where we were. They've been there for 3 days, just 1,000 people waiting to be processed. And so, like, we're getting a list from the people who are on the ground over there, like, what can we do right? What little thing? I mean, because I think we get stuck on I'm going to make this huge change in for them and for the world. And I mean, God's like, love me and love your neighbor. And that can just be as small as dropping off a generator somewhere, getting gas for a generator, dropping off blankets. I think I'll say it for me. I get so caught up in wanting to do something big, and then I just am paralyzed and don't even do the small things.
It's so true, Jessica. And I think for me too, some of my struggle is coming back from a trip like this, and then the next day your quote unquote real life.
Yes.
You're back into your, and then you're like, wait, did I just go spend for
That's
me,
right.
I was there for a whole week. Did I just spend 6 days at the border seeing some things that are full of hope? We saw a lot of hope and we saw a lot of despair. And then what does that look like in my everyday life? I think that's a tension that I feel in all areas when I come face to face with the least of these. And then I go back to my very privileged life. I feel that tension a lot. I think that you summed up pretty well what you learned or took away.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that you feel like this is what I'm looking back on this trip going, here's what I took away?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I just said, but I also just think for us as Christians to believe and remember not only the image bearer part, but that we're all connected. So the flourishing of my neighbor impacts me. Even if I don't think it does, like I was living in this world before where I thought, well, I don't really see any results or any, there's nothing about the immigration policy that's going on in the border that changes my life. Well, it actually really does. It impacts me. And so for believers especially, but really for the whole world to remember that the shalom, the wholeness of my neighbor should be just as important to me as my own wholeness, my own shalom, the peace in my own house, to remember that we're interconnected. I think that was something that I took away in a deeper way, something that I've kind of been thinking about a lot, but coming back from that, just the reminder, if they're not flourishing, I'm not either. It should mean that much to us. I mean, Jesus said it, right? Like, what you do to the least of these, you do unto me. And so for me to say, what's happening to them is happening to me too.
That's in conflict with what the world would tell us, especially living in the country that we live in. That is a conflict. And I think it's a conflict I want to feel forever.
Yeah.
Like, I think when I stop feeling that conflict, that's an indicator to me that I have given into what America tells me should be the first thing on my mind. And that would be the flourishing of Americans. Jessica.
Can I just say one more thing? I just think it would be very easy for us to feel condemnation in this, and like, oh, it's easy for me to be like, oh, my entire life I didn't even know this, and it's going on 30 minutes from my home, and to live in condemnation and guilt. And Jesus doesn't call us to that either. He calls us to live in a freedom of forgiveness, so that I'm not burdened, weighed down by my condemnation or by condemnation. I'm not burdened by my guilt, but I can know I'm forgiven, which gives me the courage then to say, I can try again to love my neighbor. This doesn't all depend on me. God loves me and forgives me. So now, because of that, I live in this generous, wild freedom where I can go out and love others as well.
I love that. That is a good word for us to end on. Jessica, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the trip with me.
Yeah,
you and your mom. It was a joy to have you there. And thanks for sharing your thoughts today.
Thanks, Jamie.
Hey friends, I hope you loved this conversation as much as I did. To make sure that you never miss any of the happy hour conversations, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below to make sure you're notified every time we release a new episode. And if you want more content today, click on those videos over there. I think you're going to like them just as much as you like the one today.